Hello, hello. Welcome back to Spicy Takes and Tax Breaks. I am your host, Aubree Denekamp, and this is Danielle Byford, the brilliant business attorney. Danielle, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're excited to dive in today. I want to know really what you experience the most in the sense of, holy crap, we shouldn't have done that, and how you help clients out of it, because it's things I see daily on my end, and I don't always know how to help people, so we're excited to have you on.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got started into Byford Law Firm.
So I got started in the business and corporate world about, I want to say 8 or 9 years ago. And when I was in-house counsel for a company, so did all of their corporate business, transactional, employment side work, compliance. And from there, just transitioned to different law firms to when I started my own 6 years ago.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
I'll do all corporate general business work.
Okay, so before we jump into what that looks like, why did you start your own firm? What prompted that?
So it really was. So there's a part of law firms that have like standard billable hour requirements, the long hours, lots of work. And it was one of those where it was actually at the start of COVID. And there was just kind of that transition where I realized, oh, I can actually, one, not have billable hours, really support my clients. A lot of what I do is with flat fee work. And so being able to support startups, small business clients that aren't, engaged through a huge law firm that have these enormous fees. And then I realized I like being my own boss and doing my own thing.
That's incredible. So, what is it that you help businesses with? If I were going to start a new business tomorrow and be like, hey, would I call you, and how does that go?
So so startup. So individual or a couple partners, if they're now wanting to start their business, just starting off with the first initial questions, which is usually, what is your business and where do you want it to go? So that's always one of the goals when we're looking at starting it up, to see what their end goal is. And sometimes they don't even know. So we're just looking at what they want in 3 to 5 years. And then we can start with the initial drafting of the paperwork, getting their contracts in place if they need them, just knowing what kind of business it is and where they're planning on going from there. But yeah, all the way from startup, getting everything initially in place, to once they're operating, and 3-5 years down the line, we might need to do a review.
I love that. So, why do you need to know the end goal of where they're going? Does that have anything to do with selling the business in the future? If they're looking to offload it, how does that work of actually understanding that picture from the beginning?
So it helps determine, one, what type of entity setup we might need to do. So if they are looking at growing to scale and then to sell, then we want to make sure, do we set up in a certain state? So that way we know what protections they should have in place underneath that state's corporate laws. If we need to do an LLC, if they want to keep it small, if they are planning on just keeping it within the family, and then we know it's going to be a close LLC. So we have some more modeling with the way the entity is structured, and it all comes down to, they need an operating agreement, bylaws. And so if we know at the beginning, we can have a roadmap of everything that we need to get into place.
I love that. And so for a lot of the people listening here today, I think that they don't know really when they need bylaws or an operating agreement even in place. So let's give an example. We'll give myself, I own a accounting firm, single owner, one shareholder, S Corp. What does that look like in the sense, do I need an operating agreement because there's no partner involved? Is that still beneficial for myself as a business owner? What does that look like? Because I think one of the biggest things I see with my clients is they are not structured, set up from a liability protection to begin with, or even a tax advantageous situation. And I don't think people understand how. So you kind of tell us when that matters.
So the part that matters is, one, when you do your entity setup. And so that's going to be the difference if you have an operating agreement or bylaws. So your LLC is going to follow along with the operating agreement. Corporation is going to follow along with the bylaws, your shareholder agreement, all of those get in place. So it's really understanding, are you an LLC, a corporation? If you're not one, determining what setup or structure you want to be. Again, advantages and disadvantages to both. So having that conversation to know at the start. And it doesn't matter if you're an individual or if there's 2, 5, 10, it is still having that conversation and making sure you have those in place. Because once you set up an entity, it becomes its own sort of living person, even though it's not a human, it's still under the law considered a person. So it can get sued in court, it can enter into contracts, it can do all of those things that you as a person could do, and you're doing it on behalf of the business. But if you don't have those documents in place, it's essentially like a toddler running around chaotically versus an adult with a structure, a college degree that knows what they're doing and where they're supposed to be going.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. So that's another one I really see a lot of is people are very excited. They come to me and they say, hey, I can't wait to start working with you. I became an LLC this year. I'm no longer just a sole prop. I can't wait to see what I can write off. And obviously that is not really a write-off difference, but let's talk into a little bit more about what the liability protection of an LLC gives you, and then kind of what the difference between an LLC versus like an S Corp and C Corp in the sense of actual legal protection and what those bylaws and operating agreements look like.
So the biggest difference, especially when a lot of people come to me and they're like, oh, I'm an S Corp. And then I ask them, well, are you an LLC or a corporation? Because an LLC can be an S Corp. It's a tax election.
And we're not having annual minutes needing to be
Right.
included in all of the annual filings and things differently. Yes, which a lot of people miss, though. A huge
They don't
thing
understand
that's
that.
missed. Yes.
Yep. And so with the LLC, you don't have all of those additional requirements, but you can still do S Corp election. And the key part of the S Corp election is ensuring that your business is profitable enough to have an employee underneath it, which could be the owner, to get those, essentially those tax benefits of it going through. But that's a conversation to have. That's what, when I send back to you or to the CPA, because it's all financials of when to actually make that election. But your protections ultimately come in as an LLC in protecting your personal assets. So if something happens through your business and you have the LLC structured correctly and they can't pierce the corporate veil, which is kind of complicated, they can't go after your house or your retirement accounts or other savings accounts that you might have stored away. We're in a community property state, so your spouse's assets. So that's where having that entity is set up.
And I think that's a really great way you put it too, because one of the big things I preach about constantly is piercing the corporate veil. And what that means is having your business not be paying your mortgage or X, Y, and Z, making sure they pay you as the employee or the employer, depending on what we're looking at that situation as, and having them then pay all of those fees out personally so you're not piercing that. And that's a good point that a lot of people don't look at anyways. They get that LLC for that protection, and then it is kind of null and void from
They
the
run
time they start.
everything through their LLC.
Exactly. They continue to do it the same. So do you guys actually then assist with helping file those annual minutes and everything year after year, specifically whether that's Arizona or any other state? Is that something you guys handle or does that get deferred out?
We do. So that's all in managing the general counsel work for businesses, is making sure that they are compliant if they need minutes, resolutions, even with LLCs that are less formal and you might not have to have minutes or resolutions, but major decisions and having it documented, we help draft those in a way to ensure that it meets what a bank would look at or a bookkeeper would look at or
With the
IRS
IRS.
would look at.
One of the big things I've been seeing recently, and I know you and I had kind of chatted about it prior, but a lot of my clients have been recently experiencing issues with either employment suits or having past employees having disgruntled issues, wrongful termination. And one of the big things for them is like, what could they have done to prevent getting in those situations? But then two, does someone need to reach out to you when they're called with something like that? Or is there proactive measures that can be being taken, whether it's myself as a business owner or in the trades or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of proactive measures that we recommend at the start. So when you are getting ready to hire an employee, is making sure that one, you already have a payroll company that's on board that you're comfortable with, that is going to make sure everything is set up, because that's going to help with a lot of the onboarding paperwork, which your DIYers usually miss. So
Yep.
all of those documents, or they're not getting it done timely, which could result in hefty fines and penalties if they're not doing that onboarding properly. But then it's also doing the employment agreement and getting all of those listed. A lot of states you'll hear, oh, we're an at-will state, so that means I can terminate you at any time for any reason. But that's not the case. It's at will. I can terminate you at any time for any reason, as long as it's not an illegal reason. And so then it's making sure that when you do hire that employee, that you have your policies, procedures in place to ensure if that employee ever gets offboarded, whether it's through a resignation or termination, it could be, for whatever reason they ghost you. But if you don't have a policy in place that says if they miss 3 days of work, we're considering that you abandon your position. So having all of that in place before you even make the first hire, and having your attorney relationship. So that's why I always recommend reach out to the attorney at the start, because if something does happen, you can pick up the phone, call the attorney and say, hey, we made this termination and now they're coming after us. You don't have to go
Tell the
over
whole story
everything.
again.
And then we also can say, well, we already have all of these documents in place that protect your business, so this is how we can respond, versus then doing, oh, we need to do mitigation measures because you didn't have anything in place. So where can we plug in any of the holes? And if not, what are we now looking at for your liability because nothing was in place? Even if you're saying it was a justified termination, the employee is going to say it wasn't justified for whatever reason that they can come up with. And part of going back to your comment about the economy, when we see kind of a downturn in the economy, we see employment suits rise because they can't find a job. They're looking at how are they going to make ends meet. And Arizona is one of the lowest states for unemployment payments, and they need to figure out where they can get this paycheck from.
Which makes a lot of sense and why I'm seeing it more. What about though, like what do you actually put into those agreements? Because we're going to go back almost a decade ago now. I was actually working as an in-house controller and kind of pseudo office manager for a company. And we had an employee who was in a car accident. They were at fault. It was in our company vehicle. And it ended up becoming, we won and it was a successful case, but it came down to the point that in our employment agreement and the vehicle agreement that we had, it didn't say that he had to put a seatbelt on. And because he didn't have a seatbelt on during the accident, he didn't know that was a company standard or procedure, even though it was by AZ law. Again, we won, that got thrown out pretty quick, but we had to hire a lawyer and go through the whole process in that situation. Are you in like what you guys do as a firm? Do you guys actually help build out what those policies look like in an employment agreement, or how does that work?
Yeah, so from the employment agreement, which is just going to detail what they're being hired under, and different levels for a C-suite executive who might have a lot more protections and negotiations going on, versus if you're hiring into, especially tech companies, you're hiring somebody into a software role, they have access to all your systems, or marketing, they have access to your client list. And so in all of those employment agreements will be, specific and detailed for protecting the company and that information. And then policies and procedures, a lot of clients will come to me after the fact, and then I do the corporate cleanup and actually fix the policies that they either had currently ChatGPT write for them, or they pulled off online and they just filled in the blanks where it was. But every business is different. And I think that's the biggest part that you probably see as well. We're like, oh, well, we have brick and mortar here, brick and mortar there. They both sell ice cream, but each ice cream company is still going to run differently. So you don't want to just use their standard policies and procedures because it's going to be different for your company. So online forms are kind of a great starting point to start asking the questions on what you want in your own. And then we help tailor it to make sure it fits your company, but it's also legally compliant. So you're not in there adding discriminatory language or doing something that you're putting out in there that's divulging trade secret or confidential information.
I love that. No, I think that's a really great point. And something that, even myself is probably lacking in a bigger sense than should be. It's something that's probably, what do you guys recommend even like on the review points of that? Is that annually? Is it based on growth? What does that look like?
So almost both. So definitely based on growth, because that's when a lot of the laws, especially at the federal level, will get put in place is at what point you meet, 5 employees, 10 employees, 15, 50. That's where you hear those big numbers because that's where federal laws kick in place. But then at the state and even county and city level, we have certain laws that get put into place based upon employee count. So it is once you hit certain employee thresholds, doing another review. And then not necessarily annually, but I usually have people like at least 2 to 3 years, making sure you're going through and doing those updates, or if there's a major change in the law. So like when we had Arizona sick leave law come out.
Yeah, making sure all those are changed. Okay. And that's great. Do you recommend what people should do? So I would assume, similar to my clients, they ask me a lot of questions that are very out of scope or like recommendations of how they should run their business. And I get that. We're all looking for support. But from your end, you get a lot of questions of like, what should we be giving as PTO? Like, what is the standard here? What are my competitors probably giving? And is that something you guide on at all, or is that something you direct somewhere else? I don't really know.
So it is because, I mean, you don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
it's usually, well, this is what my prior employer did before I started my own business. Was this right? Was this enough? And so I do help in asking questions to see, are you going to be on the high end, which you're offering more than what the standard is? Or are you just going to be, this is what the law says I can give you? Or if you're wanting to be like one of the open companies that are just kind of what Google did and it's new and innovative.
Yes.
So it's asking the questions. And then, yeah, if they have, we do help guide them. I don't tell them, yes, you have to have 12 hours of vacation per month because there's no legal requirement for that. But if it's a sick leave mandate or any of those, then yes, I tell them that. But then otherwise, it's asking the questions to see what they want to do for their business.
Absolutely. And leaving it more discretionary. That's great. What about, so one of the big things I get, and I touched on in a recent podcast, but I have a lot of people who want to hire as 1099s because I'm sorry, I mean, W-2s, they're expensive, myself included. It is one of my bigger eating costs, specifically until you find those right people who kind of fit into the company and that expands and grows. But sometimes there's hiccups throughout that where you have to change and shift and continue growing. But what happens, I try my best to advise the legal, like what people are supposed to do versus not. And obviously we record whatever that looks like too. But from your end, if someone wants to say, hey, I'm going to have a 1099 contractor versus hiring them as a W-2, is that something you can guide on? Of like, here's what a W-2 is supposed to be, and here's what a 1099, here's the different parameters that lay behind here, and maybe putting an agreement in place for the contractor. Is that something you guys handle too?
Yeah, so let's break that part down. So between a W-2 and a 1099, a lot of new businesses will just do the 1099 because they don't want to do the employment taxes and the work comp and all of the other parts that come with it.
Yeah.
And really they're misclassified. And that's where you're going to get your IRS penalties. The state's going to look on you because, and then it's hefty. So you think like regular employment taxes are bad. Once you get those penalties for being misclassified, especially if you did it intentionally or willfully, all of those fun words.
They do love to throw those fun words around too. They like
and it's
those.
usually like one of those where they'll go and pull an email and oh, you said the wrong thing here. So now we're going to rack it up for you. And so it is determining at the start, are they actually an employee? Or do you have enough level of control or can they really be 1099? So you're giving them that flexibility. And so it's having that conversation at the start. Unfortunately, a lot of people do misclassify them because they're just trying to save and they don't realize until later on. But then it is if they are identified correctly. So whether it's a W-2, 1099, if they don't have an actual written agreement in place, even if it's just like a simple 1 or 2 pages detailing what it is, then you're really missing the whole part of being a 1099, having that contractor agreement in place, giving you those protections. Because with the contractor, unlike a W-2, where you can terminate them as long as it's not for an illegal reason, with the 1099, if there's no contract in place, how are you terminating that relationship? What happens if something doesn't go right or wrong? They're not an employee that you could just say, hey, let's, terminate this. They're going to come back and say, I'm a contractor. You owed me for 12 months of service.
Or whatever else. So what about like one of the big things here is people will give me the whole runaround about why they're a 1099. It is okay. They've done all the Google research on it and XYZ. But what happens in the sense of like, do you go through and recommend like, hey, did you pull their workers' comp or whatever their COIs are that are required for this job? Have you done all those things? Do you go through the mechanisms of that, or is that totally out of scope for you?
So it depends on the level of the company that we're working with and then what their budget is to have an attorney do it. But usually that's where, so with all of my clients, when we send a contract back to them, I get on a Zoom call or they come into the office and I go through with them. And within all of them, we're going to have an insurance requirement. and then making sure that they understand that part of it, because it's amazing how many don't
I
know,
have no idea about
or
what
that you
is.
can get added on as an additional party or any of those items through it. But usually it is putting it off onto the client, unless they're like, you just need to do it and here's the fees for it, because we still have to charge.
No, I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of go a little bit of a different direction here. What if I were to be like, hey, Danielle, you gotta give us the full blueprint of if you were to make it correct, just like if I were to in an accounting standpoint, if someone were to say, hey, I'm creating a business now, give like the next 5 or 10 steps. What comes next? Say they were to come to you, I'm your client. I say, hey, I want to create a business. I'm going to let you actually do it correctly, and then I'm going to hire you for that. What are those steps that need to happen next? Do I have to have a statutory agent? Do I need a lawyer? Do I need to have an accountant, or even know if I need sales tax or a UI number? Like, what is your guys' scope there, being like, hey, if you were to start a business, you need X agreements in place, you need, and we'll use accounting as the basis. So we'll use myself, like we're starting AV accounting tomorrow. What does that need to be in place before I hit all the hiccups to be like, oh crud, I should have had that, or XYZ? What does that need to happen?
So, especially so some businesses are going to be more regulated than others, but for the ones that are usually just your startups, so that don't have to go through like
All the
additional
licensing and
licensing and all
compliance.
that.
Yep.
So yeah, so it's making sure that you have your entity actually approved, so not just filed, but approved. That you
That's
go
right.
through.
It's funny you say that. I've actually had two recently that were not approved, and they were operating as if such without an EIN, even, and all of the things. So it approved is a huge
Yes,
piece
so
there.
filing and approved, and sometimes you can have it as the effective date of when it'll go through, but that's one of those. Get it filed so that way it's approved. Having your EIN in place so that way you can actually go and open your
bank
bank
account.
accounts. And I usually recommend more than one bank account, so that way you have your,
Yes,
operating
operating.
account, payroll account, your, other accounts that you might need for certain pieces of it. So one, protection from not just
Fraud.
running through
Yeah.
that you actually have things going on, but you're not going to open a business bank account without your EIN. And then getting your at least an operating agreement in place detailing, how is this business going to operate? What is it going to do? And then, of course, all of your then systems get put into place, and which is usually another part that I help guide, especially startups that don't know what they're doing, is get an email that doesn't have at gmail.com
Yeah.
that actually has your
Hotmail.
domain.
Oh,
That
website maybe.
Yeah. So, and even if it's not a full website, but just having a legitimate email, and then it's, yep, once you're making money and you're doing well, then it's, okay, now I'm ready to hire an employee.
What do we
Ask
do
those
now?
questions at least, because you're going to know about a month to 2 months before you're ready to hire an employee. So starting that conversation at that point. Or if you are in a service industry, having a standard master service agreement in place before you even have your first client. Or if you're in like a construction company, making sure that you have very specific contracts in place,
Yeah.
so that way you can't go out and start engaging in those bids and getting those contracts.
Perfect. What about, since you kind of went down the contractor line, one of the big things we get asked a lot is to do like lien waivers for big projects and things like that. And a lot of times I'm like, no, here's who we defer out to. What does that look like on your end? Is that something, one, you recommend, but two, do you guys handle that, or do you guys work with a company that handles that in-house?
So we don't handle the actual liens in-house. We do provide a template of what, and it usually comes from the ROC, or if they're in another state, what's, required from their contractors. And so we'll give a template that they can use. But most companies, I usually say, go to the expert in that field. And so there's a lot of really great actual lien companies or the bond companies that can help with those. Because that's one of those where I'm very much like, make sure you stay in your lane. So that way,
Yes.
go to the expert that knows that, because that's what's going to save you the most.
Absolutely. And the best part about that is they are like pennies on the dollar almost. I believe most lien waivers are like $25 to put in place and like $10 to unwithhold afterwards. So it's a very easy, but also very,
If you do it wrong, it could be
yes, detrimental.
seriously.
Detrimental to lots of things that you don't want to be. So that is great. I love that. Okay. What are some of the biggest nightmare things you see and you're like, people should definitely stay away from this, or never do this, or do this instead? Is there anything that jumps out to you?
So I I mean, there's a lot of don't do this, but usually it's one when they have already set up their entity, they've filled out their operating agreement by using just fill in the blank forms, and now they're at the stage of either getting an investor or getting an SBA loan or something where somebody is taking a really close review of all of those items. And the bank is like, well, your operating agreement says you're supposed to have this, provide it to me, and they don't have any of that. Or the investors are coming on and it could be a really valuable investor that could help them grow
Immensely, yeah.
and everything, but the investor is looking at your operating agreement is just these fill in the blanks, or it's
You
not
lose your
actually there.
confidence.
There's
It's
nothing
not.
there, or it's dated incorrectly. And now that investor might move on somewhere else. And so that's where it really is at the beginning of at least having those initial documents in place. And then the other part that I see a lot of business owners when they start growing and they're successful is they don't like to delegate.
Ever.
That's
It's scary. I mean, we get it. As business owners, we get it, but it's the worst thing any of us can
is.
do.
Yeah. And so being able to actually delegate and say, I should not be drafting my own contracts. I
My
should not
own
be doing
law
my own
agreements, yeah.
bookkeeping. I need somebody else to
Yes.
do that, and I can delegate it, especially with bookkeeping because, or payroll. Those are the two that I see. Oh, I'm just going to go through this company and
It's fine.
then it's fine. And then you realize that, oh, these are actually things that if I'm not doing them correctly,
Can take a
then we're
business
doing-
and a personal life almost financially.
yeah,
depending
and then
on-
we're doing a lot of cleanup on that end. which-
Yeah. I can imagine that's exhausting, but great for your business. Also horrible to have to execute it, like to facilitate. But okay, that makes a lot of sense. If you were to start your business again 6 years ago, did you feel like you were in the prime position of like, hey, I know what I should do, XYZ, to make this successful, or at least from a liability standpoint or protection? Or would you look back and be like, okay, hey, 6 years ago, maybe these are things I would have done differently too, even? I don't know if that's a thing. I can look back in my past few years and be like, there's 80 million I would have done different. And I think that's growth for everyone. But I don't know if anything stands out to like business owners specifically in setup that you are like, oh, goodness.
I think so. It was interesting that, so I started my business at the start of COVID. And so there was a lot of where we couldn't go down to the corporation commission to
Yeah.
get things done. So it was all done online, which was great.
But also
but
kind
I-
of new at that point. Like
It
things
was.
didn't used to be fully online
Yeah.
up until then too. So
Yeah. So when I first started, I probably did a lot more than I necessarily needed. So I spent a lot of time with like my Gmail, making sure it was all super secure because I would be doing a bunch of stuff over my just like working from home.
Yeah.
But I would also probably change. So I had, when I set up my business, I used my personal home address because I didn't have an office address. I was like, oh, this is just my own personal address. And that would be something
Last
I'd go
ditch
back
the
through.
world.
Yeah. And so I would go back through now, especially because there's so many shared office spaces or abilities to, utilize a business location that's not your home address. And that's definitely something I would change. I actually had a client that like showed up knocking on my door. And so they're like, well, this, I'm like, oh,
thank you
I
for
definitely-
going on the corporate commission office to find me. No, but that's a great point. And I actually get calls for this a lot. I get statutory agent requests. We do not do that as a business at all. But talk a little bit about what a statutory agent does, how it protects you, and then who to go for that.
I find that so interesting because the complete opposite. So we usually don't get asked that a lot, but that's usually where it would fall, is the attorney that's helping set up the company. I'm
going to date myself a little bit,
Yeah.
but back in the day, Google, before ChatGPT and any of that, like Google had just first came out, and I didn't really understand what a statutory agent was. And again, we're talking over 2 decades ago, but I Googled what that was, and I found a lot of really great information even 2 decades ago. So you can explain that further now versus me, just because it's more your lane. But it is one of the cheapest things you can do as a business owner, and in the most protective way, which is mind-blowing a little bit to me that people don't know about it. So I'll let you go for it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest confusion comes from because different states call it a different thing. It does the same service. So you have your registered agent or your statutory agent or your agent for service of process. And so each state calls it something different, which is why I think a lot of people get confused because they don't understand. but it really is separate from your business address, which is why sometimes law firms will be listed, but it is where the business can get served with any of the legal paperwork. So if you are served a subpoena, if you're served a lawsuit, or even just a demand letter, or a client's upset and where they send a letter to, so they're not getting it at a personal business. So we love secretaries, we love receptionists, but they might not want to know or should know about what comes in on these legal bases, especially if there is an employment dispute, financial IRS notices. So if you have a registered agent, they get all of those legal notices and that legal paperwork, and you're now keeping it confidential. Just whoever has access to it can now see it. And
so when you're Googled and someone goes to look up Byford Law Firm, the Write-Off Queen Avie Accounting, any of those, they're not finding our personal addresses. What's interesting about that, though, is I find a lot of people who are like, I'm going to do this at the beginning, see if it kicks off, it works, and then I'll change to a statutory agent. Why is that horrible?
So nowadays, because everything is online. So even though you can find it, and as an attorney, when I'm looking at trying to find somebody that may have diswronged one of my clients and we're trying to figure out how to go after them, we can look at all of those papers and see, oh, I see they use their personal email to pull this up. So even though their business isn't there, I see their personal email, I see their home address. And so that's what the Arizona Corporation Commission, again, every state is different in those regards, but having your statutory agent at the start, whether it's through a law firm or the statutory agent services, which are a ton out there, and they're, like you said, they're affordable and easy, and it makes complete sense to utilize them. But so many, they're just like, oh, this is an online form, so I'm going to go online and do it myself.
It's my house. I get that. I've done that also personally, so I'm embarrassed by it, but I've also done that myself just out of impatience, and it happens. So no one should feel bad. But what if anyone listening here is like, shit, didn't do this. Like, we've checked off several things here today, and if they don't have those, do we wait until we get a notice in the mail being like we're in trouble or being sued by someone, whether that's client, employee? Do we come and reach out to someone now? Are we penalized reaching out now? What do we do at this point?
So it is, and I'm sure probably in the bookkeeping area as well, it's way more affordable and streamlined to do all of it now. Even if you can't do it everything at one time, because cost, time, it's the holidays. Nobody wants to do anything around Christmas or, summer vacations. But at some point, just getting that map built out of, this is when I don't have these in place, but I want to get this in place by the first quarter. I want to get this in place by the second quarter. And doing everything at the forefront just makes it cleaner in the long run, versus when we do a lot of defense. And so when you get that notice or you get that demand or a lawsuit, and now we didn't have anything. And so there usually are higher level of penalties or consequences.
And you're up against a clock on top of it too. So you're having these penalties staring you in the face and that are getting accrued on top of each other. But you're also having people breathing down your neck when you're typically in that stressed, like either I didn't know or I didn't have the money or time, whatever that ends up landing at before, which is scary, I think, for a lot of people. But I agree. I think if you were to reach out to the IRS and say, hey, I didn't file in 7 years, here's the 7 filings, versus having a notice come to you with penalties and interest accrued, you're going to be in a very different situation. And for a legal standpoint, they move a lot quicker than the IRS does most of the time. So you are in a much faster pace. Here's your demand than the IRS even would on most standpoints, which is scary at times.
It is. And the thing in Arizona, so businesses can't represent themselves in court
at all.
They have to have an attorney,
no matter how little of a claim or big. Yep.
And judges have no leniency for it. So if you're now left with only 20 days to respond to that complaint, you're interviewing attorneys, you're trying to tell them all of the information, and because they are expediting it, you're going to have a higher cost versus even just having a relationship with your attorney, your bookkeeper, your CPA, all of those kind of key figures in your business, whether you're not using them every single month, but just having them there. On.
And knowing your business structure, how you operate when an emergency happens versus learning everything is huge. So do you ever have to work with like an insurance agency. So I have a couple of my clients right now who are going through some really interesting employment disputes, and some of their policies have coverage to help support the lawyer fees through some of that, whereas some of them do not have that. And it was something that prompted me when they started going through this, and that was brought up, that I actually looked into my own commercial coverage and upped my insurance just in case something like that were to ever happen too. But is that something that you deal with, help advise on? Because even myself in this situation, like I just went and got the policy added. I don't really understand the coverage yet, haven't looked through it. It's not something I've had to deal with myself, and I hope to never deal with in the future. But is that something, one, you advise on, but two, you understand more of the mechanics behind it, since I don't?
So, two questions that you had there. So, when clients come, and I always recommend talk with an insurance broker, because they're going to know the most about your insurance policies. So as opposed to
And
most
what
businesses,
caveats are,
yeah,
yep.
most business owners are going to go online
Yep.
and find the policy, and they don't understand that, oh, you should probably also have an E&L policy if you have employees, not just work comp, but your directors and liability, your cybersecurity, your
Mistakes
all of those.
happen, all the things.
Yeah, and so it's like talk with a broker, and it needs to be not just your friend that does, personal insurance policies.
And
make sure it's an actual
commercial,
commercial, like that knows
broker.
the business industry and is a broker, because they can make sure you have the best policy and then what's in the policy. We do help review. So if there is a claim and one of our clients might have a claim, we'll help go through and see if there's coverage, but we always recommend contact your broker to see if you need to make the claim. And then we also see at what level. So we'll work with the broker when they're like, hey, your deductible is going to be more than what you can ultimately pay. So we do a lot of the work with there. We don't get hired through insurance. So my law firm isn't one of the ones that insurance then hires. So those are specific law firms that are contracted through insurance.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. So they are. It's similar to like if you get in a car accident with your car, you have like the approved people versus like if you want to go and say, hey, do this, and they come out and take pictures and all that. I get it. They're not going to come take pictures of the claim in your sense, but it's the same mechanism. Okay. That's interesting. I actually didn't know that at all.
So that's one of those, and a lot of businesses. So they'll be working with the insurance companies and then us as general counsel sometimes, because they're like, okay, your claim is limited to so much and we can only answer certain questions. So we'll usually help the client in understanding what's coming through, because their insurance attorney isn't going to give them as much information and advice. So we'll help on those parts of it.
And that's a really good point, because I think my policy specifically was $20,000 that I added, but I know a few of my other ones have surpassed what their policies were with the lawyers. So that's also an interesting factor to look into. So anyone out there who potentially could have any sort of lawsuits, definitely if you have insurance, it's very inexpensive to add that. So think about that too. If you have those extra safeguards, think about it.
And another one of those, doing it now versus when something comes, because on the questionnaire, it's going to be, do you have any prior claims? Do you have any of, And
that definitely impacts what your premium's going to be on that, whether that's monthly or annually. So I love that. Okay. Before we sign off here, is there anything else that you think we need to let any business owner know, someone thinking about starting a business, someone who owns a business and thinks they're doing great already, but potentially just waiting for that mishap to happen? Anything to close off with?
So I think it is that any business owner really needs to have the key people in their corner, and not just having them siloed. And so once you have a business, whether it's super successful or you're just getting it going, having your key, so your bookkeeper, your CPA, your business attorney, those are all people that you just want to have an initial relationship with. So that way, as your business grows and develops, they're on board with you and making sure it grows and develops, and giving them permission to speak and relay information to each other. So that way they can be there to help your business
advocate for you.
And that's where I think attorneys, we always get put as like, oh, they're just going to kill the deal, or they're going to say, no, I can't do this. And really, a good business attorney is going to be there to help
facilitate it, make sure
it's successful, and getting you the right things that you might not know that you can ask for, that you should be asking for.
Well, and that's a big point of it too. And we kind of talked about it right at the beginning of the call. We'll finish it out with this, is a lot of people have no idea what it takes to create a business, but bigger so once you've created this and it is making money and doing what you wanted it to do, when you've hit this, hey, we made it successful. What happens when you want to offboard yourself? Not offboard the company, but like yourself from the company, whether that is still having ownership and delegating within, or bigger, and most of the time, selling the business, selling the book of business. What does that look like? A stock or asset sale? Any of those things, because from a tax standpoint, those are huge, huge things that matter of how we're going to plan and make sure you're successful in that. Is that something when you are helping set up the organizations or doing those check-ins that you're looking at and discussing with them of like, hey, is it time to maybe change how we're structured as an entity? Or, okay, which is a huge thing. So a lot of times it's 5 to 7 years for those changes when you're looking at a sale specifically. So if people don't have those in place within that time, we're unable to ever recapture it back. So if you're paying the people and working with them, it's super important to be having that feedback. And a lot of people don't have any of that throughout any of their careers. So I think that's incredible. Any other pointers that you think people should be looking at as they're running the day-to-days?
No, I think that's a great ending point. Like, so when you are getting to where you're like, wow, this business has grown, it's successful, where do I want it to go? And that's kind of where you then definitely want to have those conversations early and not when it's happening.
Well, and I think a lot of people do. They wait until it's happening or they're ready to do it. And they go to one specific person, whether that is a CPA, an accountant, a bookkeeper, a business attorney, a broker, a whatever sector that is in. They typically go to the one person. And what is missed there is the compliance behind other things, the financial gain, the tax liability that comes behind once you sell that $5 million business. Like, that's great, but you owe $2 million in taxes. Not so great. Like, the differences of that stuff is important, I think, as you're going and having someone guide you. So similarly to having someone run your finances, make sure you're compliant, having someone make sure that you're also set up. So when you want to do these things, you're not having a $2 million bill on a $5 million sale is almost like the most crucial. If we're looking at the long term of what we built the business for, is kind of the most important. So I think that's incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, this is Aubree Denekamp and Danielle Byford with Spicy Takes and Tax Breaks. Make sure to subscribe. We'll drop a link below for you too. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll make sure all that's included.
Good job.
You did great. You did great.